Okay, I'm going to get us started. So, welcome everyone. Welcome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists for being here. As I mentioned, Jamie Deaver, who's the picture on the, in my screen on the very right, she is helping out today with paying attention to the chat and answering any questions and letting us know if there's anything that comes up. So, she is not going to be participating. She's not a panelist, but she's just here to help out. So Jamie's amazing. She helps me out with everything. So I am Jennifer Dominic of Love Life Images. I lead a team of photographers, and we've been in business for 18 years. We photograph weddings, DC, Baltimore, and all over. And I'm just going to introduce everyone. So first we have Kawania Wooten. So go ahead, Kawania. I'll let you do your introduction.
Okay. Hi there. I'm Kawania Wooten. I'm the principal consultant of Howerton Wooten Events, and I am the owner of the Enlightened Creative, which is an education platform for creative professionals, specifically in the wedding industry. And I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next is April Brown. April is the owner of Tulle and Tinsel. Go ahead, April.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be a part of this. Thank you so much for including me, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. I have been working in the event industry for the past 7 years, and I'm currently an event planner for my own business called Tulle and Tinsel Event Co. And we're about 1.5 years old now, so.
Wonderful, welcome. Next is Kurth Bob. He's a photographer. Go ahead, Kurth.
Hi, I'm a photographer based in Washington, DC. I photograph and work in the event space, both domestically and internationally, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you for being here. And Tiffany, Bird of Paradise Events.
Hi, I am Tiffany, affectionately known as Tiffany Event Planner. I own Bird of Paradise Events, wedding and event planner, mentor, coach. I am based in Baltimore.
Excellent. Thank you again all for being here. I really am not going to spend too much time talking because I really felt that it was important for me to hear your voices during this time. I think I just wanted to create a space where we could have the opportunity to let you speak and tell us about your experiences. So.
Hey, Jennifer, may I ask a quick question? There's a lot of people in the chat who are saying that they can't see all of the panelists. I think you might have to change the view to gallery view, please.
Oh, okay. Okay. There we go. I've changed it to gallery view. So, oh yes. Okay. That works. Right. Excellent. Okay. So first up, I just want to ask, how is everyone holding up and handling the events of the last few weeks?
Well.
You know, I will say that it feels very vulnerable to share. Within the Black community, we would, of course, discuss the pain and frustrations we feel. But, we have learned over the years to keep those emotions and thoughts to ourselves over time because, one, we don't want to be accused of playing the race card or accused of being angry. So it's easier to just keep it amongst ourselves and to share it so much as we all have over the last week, it feels a little exposed. And so, but on the flip side, I believe that many of us are feeling hopeful, cautiously hopeful. And of course, Tiffany, April, and Kurth, please tell me if I'm incorrect, but I feel like we are feeling cautiously hopeful that people are listening for a change and that we're hoping that this will continue past these couple of weeks of everyone feeling, and very passionate about it, and that maybe perhaps some action can occur.
I completely agree. The past 2 weeks have been so emotional. I mean, I feel like I've experienced so many just mood swings. I've seen so much ugliness on social media, but then I've also seen so many beautiful posts of people coming together and actually really trying to listen. So just like Kawanya said, I am cautiously optimistic that this will continue to go on. I'm so excited that there's so much more exposure. This time does feel different, and I feel like a lot more people are aware and really willing and really trying to make a change. So I'm very, very excited about that, and I'm excited to continue to move forward.
I totally agree with Kawanya and April. It has been a very heavy week and a half, 2 weeks that we have been just going through on top of our personal lives, running businesses as well. And on top of that, our businesses were also a part of everything that was going on because we are Black professionals in the wedding and event industry. However, it did give us an opportunity to begin to have these hard conversations that we sometimes have behind closed doors or just in 2 or 3 of us. So, being optimistically hopeful is that we, are now voicing out loud our concerns, things that we've been going through, and hopefully, that, people are listening and some changes come about.
I completely agree with that. These are conversations that we have had amongst ourselves, and they are uncomfortable, and they are, we are putting ourselves out there. I do think that a lot of people that are not people of color are not aware of the things that we experience very frequently. And I think that some of the things that we share today will probably come as a shock. So I really do appreciate you giving us this platform to explain these things that are, for us, this is something that we experience pretty frequently. So I'm excited to share those things and make people aware so that moving forward, we can change that.
Yeah, I'll just like to add to that. Jennifer, when you reached out to me and we chatted and you said, are you open to sharing some of your experiences around racism and discrimination in the industry? I think I remember laughing, right? Because it's like, I think as professionals, we carry this weight with us very well. I was chatting with a photographer friend of mine, and he said, imagine every wedding you go photograph, you're stopped at the lobby every Saturday. Where are you going? Do you have a key? And you see your white vendor counterparts simply walk through just because it's the Ritz-Carlton, right? So, for me, it's hard to separate kind of the professional piece from the life piece, because living in America has impacted my entire existence. So it's not like on the job X, this is like in my life, every single breath experience.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any stories that you are willing to share that perhaps shed some light on some instances of racism or experiences that you've had in the industry or in general?
I will give someone else an opportunity to speak first if they like. I feel like all of us have stories for days. I was speaking with Tiffany not too long ago about just the profiling that exists. I have worked in industry for many years now. I've worked for, a big caterer, I've worked at a venue, I've worked for big planners, and seeing the profiling that exists is really disheartening. I've seen, Black couples get treated differently than white couples. I've seen that whole angry Black woman stereotype definitely just very prevalent, where, you know, I'll have a couple that will come into a business that I've worked at in previous times. And, you know, my peers and colleagues will say, oh my gosh, this woman, she's so difficult. She's so hard to work with. I don't know how you work with her. And oh my gosh, did she give you a hard time? And I just look at them and I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Like, she's really not difficult at all. I mean, I feel like when a Black woman asks questions or is particular or, you know, has standards, we're seen as unnecessarily aggressive, difficult, hard to work with. When, you know, I would have another couple come in that's not Black, and the bride could say these exact same things, have these exact same requests, and it's just met with, oh, whatever you want. Yes, it's your day. You should have it exactly how you want. And just the perception and the response is, seeing those patterns over the years has been, you know, something very tough to deal with.
I agree, April. And I think as Black professionals, it is a little bit harder for us to address those businesses or those professionals in reference to, you know, how we are being treated or how our clients are being treated, because it's a very fine line to just throw out there, you're discriminating against my clients. You know, so feeling the racial profiling or feeling the tension of you're treating me and or my clients this way, you know, is a little difficult on this side because we don't see, you know, how the next couple is coming in or how you're treating the next couple, but we can feel, you know, the tension and hope, you know, and just be hopeful, like, oh, I hope you're either not treating everyone this way, or I hope you're not treating just this Black couple and the Black planner this way. So that, I mean, that's, you know, a very valid point, but it's so hard for us to address, you know, to actually go, you know, and address that venue or address that business or address, you know, that professional. For me, my professional is a little bit more difficult because in every wedding season, probably about 60% of my business are white couples, which means that at times I'm the only Black vendor. I'm maybe the only Black vendor in the room of 200 guests or, you know, things like that. So it, you know, I've grown to a point where if I am the only Black vendor, if I'm the only Black person in the venue and the only out of 175 guests, then I am crossing all of my T's and dotting all of my I's so that no one is judging the Black planner, you know? So that's kind of where, you know, I've grown to, just looking at the reactions. Oh, she's Black. Oh, they have a Black planner. Or, you know, when you walk into a room of a vendor meeting, like, oh, another Black planner, you know? So those things have just been prevalent over the years of, you know, being in this industry and, you know, being a professional. And I think I posted it yesterday that we just have to work harder at proving that we are in the business that we know, and that we know what we're doing, and that we're professional, and that we can do the job. Just because we're Black doesn't mean that we don't deserve to be there.
You know, sometimes it's difficult to identify, and like Tiffany and April, you know, I'm very fortunate to have a diverse clientele. And I will tell you, and I consider this a microaggression, probably slightly microaggression, where I remember there's a florist I work with in Maryland, and I've never had any issues. And I brought one of my brides reached out to him, and she met with him without me. And she was Black, and she had a nice budget. And after she met with him, the florist called me to be sure she actually had that much money to spend. And that is not something I have never heard I've never received that question for any of my other brides from that florist, just that one. And that to me felt like that was specifically because she was a Black bride with a large budget, and he wanted and he specifically said, before I work on this proposal, I want to make sure she has that amount of money. And that's not a question I've received for others. Another incident happened when I first started in the industry, probably within my first year, in a venue, and a very popular venue. And I was working with the venue coordinator, and she said to me, "You're only allowed to bring one assistant with you." These were her words, "I don't want a bunch of you running around the venue." And I, so busy, didn't pick up on that cue right away. It just so happened, probably a week later, there were two planners who I've befriended and we've stayed close over the years. I happened to casually tell that to them, and they're white, and they said, "Kwania, we've never received a limit on the number of staff." And the reason I asked them, I'm like, "How do you work in that venue if you're only allowed to bring one person with you?" I'm like, "We've never heard that before." And then it hit me, oh, okay. I had to, and that to me always stuck with me. I've since worked with that in that venue again, but it's always been something in the back of my head that in the beginning, the phrase was, "I don't want a bunch of you running around." That one stuck in me.
Expanding on what Kwania said about the florist questioning her client's budget, that I've experienced that same thing from multiple different types of vendors, caterers, venues, all sorts of things, where they don't question it when you are working with a white couple, but if you have a Black couple, that is something that comes up. And I remember one venue in particular that I took a client to. First of all, he was very rude to us, and how Tiffany and Kwania said, it's hard to identify if is this person just rude to everybody, or is this something that is racially motivated in certain instances like that. But I do recall him saying, "Hey, before you leave, these are our approved caterers and they're in this price range. So I wouldn't want you to book and then you can't afford this." One, him saying that really bothered me because one, I'm a professional planner, have lots of experience. I'm 100% aware of what the industry norm is for pricing. And I feel like with any other planner, that would be assumed that was already shared with the client. But also him saying that and insinuating that my client couldn't afford the venue, I do feel like that was just inappropriate. So I've also seen on the other end where, a white couple will come in, and this is when I was working more in for a corporate event planner, where, a white couple would come in, all of the stops were pulled out for them. And I mean, just everything was done to try to book this particular client who may or may not have had a large budget. It was just assumed. And then a Black couple that actually did have a large budget and, was so eager to work with the company. It was just thrown together half-assed, excuse my language. And it was just not as much thought and care put into their experience. And they ended up not booking. And, it's just like, why the differences in how, these two different types of people are treated. It's just really obvious.
So I think all of these things that we are speaking of is kind of what divides the industry. So as we are planners, we refer clients, we take clients, and things like that. And as Kwania said, she didn't go with her client that particular day. And I had the same thing with a florist. And we know that there is a limited, I'm just as an example, but we know that there's a limited amount of Black florists. So we expand our, network for those. So I had a similar a similar situation, and I referred a client, and then the florist did the same thing. She called and said, are you sure, she has the budget for this? And I said, I would not have referred her to you if I knew she could not afford your work, or that's not the business she wanted, or, and then I pulled back. And since then, I haven't even sent a client there, but and then that's what I think is what divides the industry, because to a certain extent, planners, and I always kind of say this, like, we are almost the most important people in the room, so we're referring and we're, sending business. But if you have this racism or this automatic profile in your mind that we can't afford it, or this is not what we want, or we're going to act this way, or things like that, then I'm not sending business anymore. I'm not referring another client, because I don't want my client to feel how I felt when you called me and said, are you sure? When I would not have sent my client there with a $200 budget. So that's how I think the industry gets divided, in reference to profiling.
So just to add to that, and Kwania, thank you so much for recommending me to even join this conversation. It would be interested to hear what our non-Black colleagues feel or think when they walk into an event or a room and it doesn't really reflect the industry, right? Because we see it, because for us it's all economics, right? But Jennifer, your team, and when you guys go photograph weddings, when I got into weddings, I started photographing in the Nigerian community, right? And I say the word community because every vendor would be Nigerian. The venue may be white owned just because it's American. That's how property works for these things. But it always baffled me that we never, from a high level, there's no such thing as an American wedding, right? There are Black weddings and there are white weddings. What I'm curious to know is, like, because I live this every day, so it's fresh in my reality. It's like this is daily. I during this time, you asked how we're doing. Like, I'm a bit exhausted, kind of like I feel like I'm shaking people out of their beds. Like, yo, where have you been? Like, you have, non-Black professionals and people in these different spaces where they're like, oh my gosh, like, I never thought about this. Well, recently we've been seeing a lot of, like, large publications like Brides. You can scroll down Brides till your thumb hurts. You will not see a brown face. But in the last 2 weeks, you're seeing brown faces. And to me, there's action, but then there's, like, bad faith, right? So what does it mean that you're posting Black people and shouting out Black professionals? Because let's be honest, we're not Black professionals. We're really, really good at what we do. The system that we live in and the limiting beliefs that we live under simply don't, for some reason, they just don't believe that we are, like, good enough or up to spec, right? But I think so. From a business perspective, I think that the entire industry is missing out on a lot, because innovation comes from diversity, point blank, period. And so yeah, I have countless experiences around. I mean, I jump in my car and I go to a venue, and I'm driving across the city, I might get pulled over, right? Like, these are very, very everyday kind of existence-based questions that, it happens in the wedding industry, but then it happens when I'm going to pick up my mail sometimes. And my question to, Jennifer, like, again, this is an opportunity for listening, but, what do you see when you're working in the field? And what does your heart and your head tell you about what you see?
Well, I mean, I definitely recognize it, and I see it often. You know, a lack of diversity. I mean, you have to understand where these weddings that we photograph are, you know, the most, you know, wealthy clients in, you know, our area, in the world. And I mean, it's really bothersome to me that, you know, there's so much of a lack of diversity. And I mean, there have been a few really uncomfortable situations for me where, you know, I've noticed that, you know, all of the guests at a wedding are white and all of the people serving are of color. And it's, you know, it's, I mean, I notice it. I don't know that I know exactly yet what to do about it, but I'm listening, and I'm open to, you know, what I can be doing and how I can be better. I think, you know, I try to be, you know, understanding of where my biases might be and how I can change those and pay attention to them. So I don't know that I have it all figured out, but I know that I see it. I'm aware of it. I have been aware of it, and I don't know that I've known exactly what to do about it. So I think that's something that I'm interested in, potentially a next conversation is, you know, how do I, you know, bridge those moments, those difficult moments for myself and, you know, my team. Let's see, I'll ask another question. Maybe we've talked about some of these, but this one is interesting.
Before you move, Jennifer, before you move on, there's a question in the Q&A, just to let you know.
Yes, okay, thank you. The Heidi Hiller is asking, are there venues or vendors you guide your clients to because you feel that they treat you and your clients with respect and do not discriminate? Having this conversation is so important. Thank you. That's from Heidi.
This kind of goes back to something that Tiffany said about, you know, recommending vendors and, you know, your clients having a different experience when they're with you versus without. I know for me personally, we all have preferred vendors that we work with. And in the past, I have had some situations where, you know, I might have recommended all, you know, one type of bride to this particular vendor, not on purpose, just because, you know, that's just who needed it. And then I might recommend a person of color to them. And then this person comes back to me and tells me that they've had a horrific experience with them. And I'm completely shocked and just completely thrown off by it. And I'll remove them. So I definitely go with vendors and venues that I feel comfortable with, people that I know are inclusive, that I know will treat my clients well and treat me well. You know, also, you know, going back to something that Kurt said, you know, it's a life thing. It's not just in the industry, and there's so much overlap there. And there have been times where I walk into a venue, just like Kurt mentioned, the Ritz-Carlton or another venue, and you know, there's looks and there's like, hey, are you lost? Do you need help? Is everything okay? And, you know, I shouldn't walk in somewhere and have to say, hey, I belong here. I'm working, you know, and, you know, a colleague or another vendor who's not even overseeing the event or the planner, they just walk in and it's no problem. So I definitely pay attention to those cues and make note of it. And, you know, I don't want to work in an environment like that. And I don't want my clients to be subjected to that either. So it's really important that venues, vendors, all of these people really pay attention to how they're treating people, their biases and all of that, so that they're not losing out and they just make sure that what they're putting out there is not losing. Someone help me finish my sentence.
You're not missing out on that money.
They're also treating people well, and they're you know, they're examining their own biases. So,
you know, April, listening to you and listening to Kurt, you both made me think of something about my own responsibility in this situation. I remember working with a DJ, and now when we send our DJs the rundown for the wedding, I always put everybody's names in phonetics. my version of phonetics, but phonetics, because with a name like Kiwania, I'm very mindful about how you pronounce names. And I remember having a DJ just say to me, flustered, I can't do this announcement because these names are too hard. And I remember working, I can't remember which vendor it was, but remember we were working on a mandap. And the decorator was working on one. And I remember saying something to a vendor and they're like, ugh, these weddings have too many rules. And those are those little microaggressions. My clients never heard those statements, but it was enough for me to say, I'm not working with them again. But here's the thing. I never told those vendors why I didn't work with them again. So I didn't make them realize why we're not coming back. And I'm probably doing just as much of a disservice to our culture and to the wedding industry by not calling them out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm saying? Because now they're going to take that behavior onto another wedding, and it just continues. So I own some of that. I'm not saying I own all of it. I didn't say any of these comments, but it's just enough for me to say, all right, you're off the list. I don't, because I don't want you to say anything that I feel is inappropriate to my couples. And this isn't just culturally. I've taken gay couples. I remember taking a gay couple to a same-sex couple to a florist. And I just thought she was incredibly inappropriate in how she talked to them. And I thought, okay, no more. But I never said to that florist, you were so inappropriate and stereotypical. And this is something I need to stop. And part of the reason we don't do it is we don't feel like having that conversation 500,000 times, or we don't feel like that we need to be the cultural encyclopedia over and over again. But now just listening to this, I realize we're doing our industry and our clients a disservice by not calling people out and saying, hey, you know what? That was inappropriate. Can't work with you anymore. And instead we just move on.
You are so right.
and
Tiffany and I
we just had that conversation.
Exactly. We just had this conversation. Tiffany has been doing these great planners virtual happy hours during the whole entire quarantine time. And we had this conversation, and there were some things that we discussed, and and we made a vow to start speaking up about these things, because there are vendors that, like Kiwania said, we just stopped working with them and we do not enlighten them as to why. And sometimes it's because it's a difficult conversation to have. Other times you're just exhausted from having the same conversation over and over again, which is something that we've experienced times 1 million in the past 2 weeks. It just gets exhausting saying the same things over and over again. But I do think we do need to start calling people out in a way that, is informative and respectful, but pointing these things out, because I do think a lot of people are just unaware. So I'm so glad that you brought up that point. That's really important. And I've actually have started to, speak up about these things to vendors that I've had hard experiences with. And, sometimes it's met with, hey, I'm so sorry. What can we do to make it better? We do not want to lose you. And other times it's met with pure defensiveness, and it's super, disappointing. And I think that's why, that having that experience is what has caused us to kind of just stop having those conversations. But I do think it's important for us to continue to try.
Yeah. So, Kiwania, I'd like to add to what you said. I think it is important, and we do have some agency in calling things as they are, right? However, something I read, it said all change comes from within, and if we're to call ourselves a community of professionals, then we have to share the risk. So, Jennifer, to your point, you said, well, I work in these spaces and they're just like the wealthy people, right? And to me, that's like, so what if they're wealthy people? They're still human beings and should be able, I think we should all have the courage to have these conversations, regardless of who our clients are, and regardless of the fear of not having food on the table, because quite honestly, that's what we're asked to do every time we go to work. every single time. It's like, you know, we have to bring our dignity and our excellence into spaces that really aren't created for that, right? Don't even give our presence, our presence as human beings, the acknowledgement that, like, oh, you're not just the Black photographer, you're one of the best in the world. And, you know, if we're gonna have community moments, I think that, you know, communities share risk. Like, I'm part of a community with a neighbor, and the risk is we share a firewall. If my house burns, his house burns. And I think, you know, in a lot of these conversations, you know, what I've been hearing is, it's just so risky for me to speak up. And I'm like, hey, well,
Take the risk.
take the risk, shoot the shot.
Yep.
Like, we as Americans, we build things and we force change, but it's always uncomfortable. But for some of us, the entire existence is uncomfortable. You know, I'm having a conversation now with publications in the photography world. And, you know, the first response and the initial response is, well, we try to get all the Black photographers we can. We just don't get anyone to submit. Well, let's take a minute to examine that. We submit. The issue is the way we live our life and the way we celebrate our big moments don't look like your aesthetic, so you disqualify us. So is because you own the publication, you have to understand you had kind of at the genesis of it, a decision to make, where what looks good, like what is good, what is beautiful, what is high end. Like, my high end Nigerian weddings and my high end Caribbean weddings don't look nothing like Beverly Hills high end, right? But if I submit those things to Grace Armand, it's like, nah, doesn't fit the aesthetic. So that's the depth at which I think we need to be having these conversations, because otherwise we'll just be talking at each other.
Yeah, I hear you. I just wanted to bring up one situations where I think there might be some stories that you might be able to share, where you might have had some uncomfortable situations at some of the networking events held in the industry. You know, what have you come across in those places?
I always have something to say.
Let's go for it. Go for it.
So I'm trying to give I'm trying to pause and give someone else a chance. But for me, I personally started working in the wedding industry when I lived in Atlanta, and Atlanta was a very segregated place for me. And I know that down there in particular, when I would go to networking events, it was everything was kind of separated. You know, you'd have your white vendors over here and your Black vendors over there. And, you know, coming back to the DC and Baltimore area when I moved back, I was kind of surprised to see a similar kind of thing. I feel like, you know, the Black vendors, a lot of times they kind of group together because it's more comfortable. I've been in situations where I see, you know, I'm introducing people that I've worked with, people that I've trained, people that I know more than to other people, and that are not people of color, and I'm basically ignored, and the person that is under me is the person that is clearly, what's the word I'm looking for? That's the one that they focus their attention on. Oh, and I'm just like there standing, and it's just like, I was the one that connected you guys, and I trained this person, and you're asking them questions that they don't know, but I know, and I'm just completely ignored. So those are definitely some situations that I've seen. It can be very cliquey, you know, who gets invited to what, and you can look at the crowd in some of these networking environments, and you can see that there's not a lot of people of color or Black vendors included or present there. So that's definitely a big thing that I've noticed.
Anyone else?
Networking events. Networking Networking events are difficult all in itself. They're even more difficult if you are in a diverse networking event and Black, and or if you're new. I know I have experience in Baltimore, just being at networking events where, I am trying to get to know other professionals. And of course, being in the industry, we have, people that we look up to, people we love their work, things like that. And sometimes they could be non-Black. I specifically remember being at a networking event where I saw a planner that I have been looking at for years. Totally love her work. And I went up to introduce myself, kind of, talk, do the whole 60-second networking thing. And I was kind of shunned. It was like, oh, hello. And literally, I don't think there was any reciprocation of anything else. And I remember feeling just so disappointed. And I could not, oh, maybe it's because I'm a planner too. I was trying to wrap my head around all these things. And then I just came to the realization, I was like, oh, okay, I just don't fit in that box, and I was so hurt, I just could not just wrap my head through it, and why a person to person, is coming, to you as a person, not a, and with me, it's mostly probably just me, because I was coming with excitement, like, oh my God, and I'm an introvert extrovert. I'm an extrovert introvert, so I am a networky, but only when I need to, so it took a lot for me to do that one. So it just literally took a piece of me. And then that's when it probably just became, prevalent that it was actually always the race in the room. And unless we have our own networking event where we'll all look the same, that it will be comfortable. And that shouldn't be, I got to a space probably a few years later where, I'm Tiffany in the room. I'm Tiffany event planner. I'm not the Black planner. I am Tiffany event planner in the room. And I'm going to, introduce myself. I'm going to talk to you. I don't want to feel like I don't belong here, because I do. And I think Kurt said that earlier, but that experience definitely took something from me, but it also helped me and it learned me.
Yeah. I think networking events, I haven't done a lot of industry networking events, but I mean, it's like clicking, right? Go back to high school, the cool kids, the jocks all sat together, yada, 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 yada. The Black kids sit together. It's the same thing. I mean, and is it uncomfortable? Maybe if like every Black person sat down and sat with a shrink, we'll just start bawling. But like, again, it's our reality. And, to categorize things that are like uncomfortable or comfortable, for me is, you're really not giving it the full gravity, because we don't have the choice to not work with the uncomfortable, right? And it goes again with that shared risk where, a lot of white people are now saying, oh my God, these are uncomfortable, conversations. And that is the epitome of privilege, right? Because what you're saying by it being uncomfortable is like, this isn't life or death. This isn't gonna make or break me. This is a choice, and so, networking events, again, it's the same thing. But one thing I wanna kind of touch on is, because I work in, ethnic communities that are, Afro-ethnic communities, Adi asked, what's one thing we could do? Well, look, sometimes my couples couldn't get to venues because they couldn't bring their food in. And the approved vendor list didn't cook the cultural food. So you're telling me that in a country that's supposed to be free, on the biggest day of my life, I can't eat the food. I can't eat my food. You're telling me that the way I have to nourish my very being has to come from this list that is not inclusive. Like, I can't eat my food. Like, those are the things I think about, right? Because it's a lot bigger than on comfort. This is systemic. And, you know, it's systemic, but it also cripples us because, again, you know, Black people spend money. We celebrate, we live. It just so happens that we have to live sometimes in these narrow areas.
Yeah. If I can touch upon some, you know, because I'm hearing the need for some actionable steps. And networking events is something I've massaged over the last 500 years just to make them work to my advantage. You know, what works to me is that I'm an extrovert. I'm probably going to make you uncomfortable because I don't know when to shut up. So, you know, I'm probably going to make everybody around me because they'll be putting the chairs away and I'm still trying to tell a story. What I have found for networking is that if we were to look at this step by step, what has worked for me over the years is that before I even get to a networking event, because let's just call a spade, we're all just living some version of high school, no matter what we're doing. You know, the events, you know, used to be the boys on one side, the girls on the other side. Now it's just like the cafeteria in high school where the Black kids are on one side and the white kids on the other side. We have to, one of the things that I force myself to do, and believe me, I have no desire to always do this, is make a point of doing those one-on-one or small group networking with vendors whom I want to build relationships with before we even get to the networking events. Now, that needs to be reciprocated, you know, that we're all doing this and not just us, and I say us, Black vendors reaching out to white vendors, that it needs to, you know, be a mutual effort here. But those small groups allows us to build those relationships so that when we do get to those larger networking events, we're not feeling isolated and, you know, or feeling like, as you mentioned, Tiffany, that you're shunned, that you're the person over here standing in a corner and nobody will talk to you. So I think we as an industry need to be a little bit more strategic in our networking instead of waiting for these networking events to help us build our community. We got to go after it. Meeting with people. I've probably scheduled, in this last week, I didn't schedule them. People asked to schedule them with me. 10 opportunities where I'm talking to people on the phone over the next couple of weeks, or we're going to get together when we get back in reality. So that, and these are relationships I've never had, where we can now talk about shared experiences and what we can do going forward so we can better work together. So I think our efforts have to be more strategic. Now, before you guys fuss at me and say, why is it always us? I did say it's mutual, that we got to work on this together. But I think that we got to come at this small and make it big. And that means that then we become those active anti-racist. You know what I'm saying? That we're becoming the ones who are active in the situation. And when I mean anti-racist, I'll tell you a quick story. So I had a whole exchange on Facebook last week, which is funny because I never argue with people on Facebook. I'm usually the one rolling my eyes. And it was with someone in my church about something racist, they said. And I went back and forth. And what occurred is I felt like, gosh, I was on my own with that one. I guess my whole church feels the same way. And when I finally went to Facebook messages, which I never do, so don't send me Facebook messages, there was a bunch of messages from my fellow parishioners saying, we agree with you. But what they never did was call out the racist publicly. So they support me, but they didn't call them out. That is the difference between support and being an anti-racist. So that person gets to go on thinking Kiwania was the only one who had an issue with them, as opposed to realizing that their behavior was inappropriate. And so if we were to ask our non-Black colleagues, what can they do at networking events? If you see, and it's like, again, we're going back to high school, right? If you see a person of color and they look like, gosh, I'm all alone in this situation, come over, say hello. Let's do this. Like I said, this needs to be mutual. Come over and say hello. And then we need to be open to somebody coming to us. I'm not calling anybody else. I'm just saying that. Because, we're not going to be able to do this we have all these webinars and we express how angry we are or how we feel. We need to now come up with some strategies on how we can make this work going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Go ahead.
Can I touch on that real quick? I'm sorry. And April and I just had this conversation this morning. In speaking, Kiwania, in the mutual, we were discussing an actionable item for non-Black professionals in reference to building and meshing this community is feedback. So the same way Kiwania mentioned, that she wasn't doing her part in reference to, informing the vendor or the venue, whomever, what they did wrong, then I think it needs to be mutual. So Jennifer, if you have a bad experience, with a venue mistreating Black clients or Black guests or whatever, then for you to give them feedback, or if you have a bad experience with a Black planner, instead of your next client who says, oh, I'm working with April, and you're like, no, she's a terrible planner. Did you do your due diligence and say, hey, April, I really want to continue to work with you. However, you've been late to all the meetings, and I just don't think that is, instead of what Kiwania was saying is not doing your part. So I think in meshing the feedback, on both parts, it will build the community instead of separating it, because we're all just walking away and just saying, hey, I don't want to work with any more Black photographers. They take too long with their pictures, or the planner's always late to the meetings. But they don't know that. No one has brought it to the forefront so it can be fixed and so that we can work better as a community and take the color out of it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. Let's see, there's
a couple questions in the
yeah, there's a couple questions in the let's see, Dory is saying, like I said in the chat, we left a venue because of similar microaggressions. We did tell the venue owner why he used excuse over excuse, so we were out. No looking behind. If he had responded to us with a willingness to hear and listen and learn, I might feel like that is an opportunity to grow. How do you feel about
that? In reference to repetitive
I guess
feedback?
Yeah, in terms of, when you do call someone out and they're not really responsive or receptive to the feedback that you're giving them.
Then I think we've done our due diligence. We brought it to their attention. I mean, if we have the time on our hands, of course we can take that higher. We can, expose them, and things like that. But we've done the due diligence on bringing the problem to the forefront.
I agree with you, Tiffany. I mean, again, after we had that conversation saying that we were going to start sharing feedback, I've started sharing feedback. And I mean, I've shared some feedback with the venue as recently as this past week, and I didn't get a response. So, again, sometimes you do get a really positive experience out of it, and you have a vendor or venue say, hey, I was completely unaware. I appreciate this feedback. I want to do better. I want to have a better experience in the future. I want to continue working with you. And other times they make it blatantly clear that they just don't care. And, but at the end of the day, all you can do is share and try to make the situation better. So.
Yeah, there's one more question that is in the Q&A. It says, not sure how to blend this topic into the conversation, but it is prevalent in the wedding industry. Can anyone talk about how we are, as an industry, holding venues in the DMV, especially Baltimore area, that do not disclose their full history on their websites, brochures?
That doesn't disclose their full history?
Yeah, I guess.
Are we talking about like plantation houses and stuff that are venues now? Well, it's.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. Let me just say this. And I am going to be in the minority. So I recognize this. We get caught in semantics. Washington, D.C. and Baltimore and so many of the surrounding area are cities that are created of buildings and historic homes that were built by slaves. But somehow we've gotten caught up with the plantations because it connotates things like 12 years a slave or roots. And we're like, I don't want to be there. Absolutely no. But there are so many buildings that we do work in. And as Yosira said in the comments, we don't know that, we're not sure of the full history. But I will tell you, I worked on a wedding planning book for Washington, D.C., and I'm working on one for Baltimore. And both of these cities have so many homes that we work in with no idea of the history. Part of that is us doing the research and finding out how important that is to our couples.
Mm-hmm.
But hear me for a second. Those places employ our brothers and sisters. So before we shut them down, I would rather these venues talk about what they can do for our community going forward so that we can all benefit from it, tell the history so that it's a part of it and not erased. But I struggle with us getting rid of all of these venues because there's the word plantation on it or historical home, because pretty soon we won't have anything. All we'll have are brand new hotels.
And even brand new hotels are built on some level of exploitation of like, this is exploitation of brown and black people, right? I mean,
it was the exploitation because we built these things for free,
Yeah.
However, I would much rather us communicate the history, share it so that people see how we provided service to it before we start shutting these venues down. Now, here's where I struggle. A slave house should never be something used for a wedding. Slave graves should not be harmed in the, because of they want to make a wedding prettier. But if that venue is there and there is a way for us to all keep supporting the hospitality industry, I struggle with that because the hospitality industry is probably one of our culture's biggest employers. So
I agree with you to an extent. I mean, I do, there's a line there for me for sure. I know I personally prefer, I'm not going to do a wedding at a plantation. I have seen some blog posts that I think have been extremely culturally insensitive. I mean, when you're having a cotton themed wedding at a plantation, I mean, like seriously, come on, that's ridiculous to me. I feel like my clients are very diverse, but I have a lot of them that are very conscious, and there might be a venue that they love, but we look at the history and they don't feel comfortable. So, I fully support venues disclosing their history, and that being there, but I 100% understand if one of my clients or myself doesn't feel comfortable working there for whatever reason. If that is because they continue to perpetuate that the themes that the history was built upon, or, it's not mentioned. So,
Okay.
I've had a lot of clients that have come to me and said, hey, this particular area I don't feel comfortable in, or this venue I don't feel comfortable in because of that.
Yeah.
So.
I guess where I'm going with this is that there are a lot of houses, historic homes, that probably brutalized our people the same way plantations did, and I'm concerned that we get caught up on the word plantation.
Yeah, I think it's, just to kind of broaden it a bit. For me, it's like I live in DC, right? Like the home I built in, gosh, it's been here for forever, right? Love this house though, because regardless of its history, like the current values, I think is what we should be paying attention to. And to the original question, how do we feel about venues who don't acknowledge? I think if you don't acknowledge history, you're shaping your current values, in my opinion, right? Like, the history is past, it's done. Whether or not, and I think this is kind of why we keep having this conversation in America, where it's like, man, geez, like people still don't believe that Black people are like subjugated to oppression. Like, wow, it's that getting real with things. It's like, yo, like we live in this place and this is what it is, but we want to live in this place. How do we develop new ways of thinking and working that can allow us to live in this place that we want to live in? But it's like we have to establish common ground where it's like, look, America is what it is. America is the president of America right now. That's my saying. That's going to be on a t-shirt. Like, America is the president of America. You want to know what American values are, by and large, I'm not pointing to individuals, by and large, look at who, our society is elected as our leader. And, there isn't any space to dispute that. But it's like, would one of my couples photograph have a wedding at a plantation? Maybe if they knew, if the full history of the plantation was public, and then, the values of the current ownership is working to chip away of what some of that history meant. It's all about having information and context for me. It's hard to, like you said, Kawani, to just paint broad strokes and say, plantation, dead, just off the word, right? Like, who owns it now? And what are they doing with the money that we're bringing into their establishments?
Right.
It's a great.
I think it's about research and the history. Doing your research, and we don't want our history erased. So I think it's about doing the research and about your history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. That's really insightful. I feel like, it's been something that I've not had any clarity on, and I really appreciate your thoughts on that topic in particular. I think there's also, it's also the venues that we have now that we need to hold accountable for how they're handling their diversity, especially the high-end venues, and who they're letting on their lists, and how they're acting is important as well, at least in my mind. There's a lot of very private clubs that have just kind of unspoken policies that I've seen, and I think that's really important too. So all right, so let's see. We're gonna move it along here. I want to wrap up kind of soon. I know that a lot of people have asked about actionable steps, and prior to our gathering, I asked if the panelists had any suggestions for good resources, podcasts or books, or anything that you've read that can help enlighten us. I'm grateful for those recommendations. I think Jamie's going to add those to the chat. But if there's any that you want to talk about that you think really are a great standout that would be useful to us, I would love to hear it.
I think we kind of touched on some of the action items. One being, first is the feedback. and being accountable for bringing things and issues to the forefront. I think that's really, really important because as we all kind of touched on today, those are things that, we didn't do either. So I think, but a mutual. So I think that was one of, the action items that we kind of touched on. And I've been feeling for probably like the last week and a half, and non-Black vendors, like, hey, if you had a bad experience, then you need to, inform the vendors instead of creating this circle of, all right, so we'll just do non-Black vendors. Instead of, bringing it to that vendor's attention so that it can either be fixed. Because just like Kawani was saying, like her professional probably wasn't aware of what they were saying was, microaggressive. Just like if a non-Black was to bring it to a Black planner, of what they were doing, give them a chance to fix it and be a better business. So I think that is a really important action, is feedback and communication, and not we can't feel like we're walking on eggshells. Like, we're here, this is it. Like, we're out in the open now. So let's, don't be afraid to walk on eggshells and just, give the open feedback on what you may have a issue with in reference to a Black business, to give them a chance to fix it, or at least then you have an excuse that you're not working with them anymore, or, because they're just a terrible business owner, but not just, oh, they did one thing wrong and they're just a terrible Black business. So I think that's a really important part, is to open the lines of communication and give the feedback.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tiffany. I actually see it, in my experience, I see that that more forgiveness has been given to people of privilege, I think, in those situations. I see that often, that, that they'll make a mistake, or, that maybe their work is not up to par, but because they are, white, they're white, or they get opportunity. I see it. I do see it. So yeah. Thank you.
So really quickly, Carla has been asking questions around queer trans community and kind of like how that kind of melts into what we're experiencing now, right? I can tell you, I grew up in a very conservative society in South America, Guyana, where, like, homophobia was, we woke up and we ate it for breakfast, right? Like, that's just how we were raised. However, as I grew and I learned and I experienced and I met people and I had experiences and I kind of got my head out of what I thought I should be or what I thought I should believe, I changed. But then I had my first same-sex couple, right? And they ended up firing me after their engagement session. But what I had to do is, and initially I was upset because I was like, I made you guys great pictures, like my leg, like everything was just like perfect, everything was sharp, you guys look happy. But what I realized was that I was treating them as a man-woman couple. I was using the same toolkit I had developed for working with men and women in this, like for two human beings who had a whole unique, like two human beings that were expressing love in a way that I had never photographed it before, right? So it for me, it was like, oh my gosh, like I thought that, I didn't realize how much of my unconscious bias showed up that day, where, even in the poses and how I would have them interact with each other, I never took the time to step back and look at them as like, these people experience life in a very different way than I do. And for me to work with them effectively, I have to honor that and like go in with my ignorance and be uncomfortable, right? Ask the questions, and so, that couple fired me, and it was really, I remember, going back to like the deposit, and I was like, you're not getting no money back. But I took a step back and I was like, no, this is on me. Like, this is me not having the tools. So I had to go develop those tools. And I think that's something that just understanding that the toolkit you have is usually not, it's good enough for where you are, but it's usually, you have to build on that. And, you know, I think that can be applied to, you know, how Black and white vendors collaborate, how our industry becomes more integrated. Because I'm Caribbean, I've worked with a bunch of African people. We speak a certain way. And the people I work with, I mean, I'm not gonna speak differently because I'm in a white place. I'm just not. Like, you have to take all of me.
I'm so glad that we brought this up. Actually, before I even saw Carla's comments in the chat, I was going to bring this up anyway, because, you know, I'm a double minority. I'm queer. I've been married to my wife for 3 years, and I'm Black. So I get a lot of different, you know, biases and things directed at me and some of my couples. So I'm so glad that you were aware, Kurt, that experience made you aware, because that is something that I pay attention to when I'm working with vendors. How comfortable are they working with a queer couple or a transgender couple? Because it's my goal to make each of my couples, but in particular, my couples that are in these minority groups, I want them to feel comfortable. And it's sad to say that a lot of vendors aren't, and sometimes subconsciously they say things or they exhibit behaviors that make that clear. And it's really important that, you know, those are things that we pay attention to. I do think that having better representation in these bigger blogs and these magazines are very important, especially not just Black couples, but especially Black queer couples, because you just don't see them that often. So I'm glad that you had that experience, that you learned from it. And I hope that other vendors feel that way too. I know when I was getting married, you know, that was something I paid a lot of attention to. I wanted to make sure that you have people that are giving, you know, that are genuinely comfortable being there, genuinely have good energy. And, you know, you want to make sure that a couple, this is the most important day of their life, and you want to make sure that they feel 100% comfortable. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's difficult to find that for my queer couples. So when I do find those vendors, I hang on to them. So
yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. That's awesome. So any more resources that you guys can think of that you would like to share with us, that maybe as a standout?
You know, I posted 2 books in here in the chat. The first one is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. There's actually a very good interview that he had with Brene Brown just this week. And it was it was enlightening for me. And the beauty of this book is it's introspective. He talks about his own biases and things that he swore he didn't have. And so I think it's actually a very good podcast or interview to listen to, but it's even better book to read. And then one for your children. And I mentioned that also. It's a kid's book about racism. It's by Jelani Memory. That's something. And then I know there's a lot of articles out there right now that have been happening over the past week. I believe there's a podcast called Code Switching that I believe is very helpful also. I have not listened to it, but I've heard good things about it.
I think one of the resources that has helped me is just to kind of immerse myself in communities, like genuinely immerse myself in communities that are diverse, right? You know, a common story that I hear from white people is, yo, my daddy's a racist. And I'm like, is he still a racist? Or my friend's a racist. So I'm like, is your friend still a racist? I had dinner last night. What y'all talk about? Or I've sat through uncomfortable conversations with friends and I'm like, that's still your friend? Y'all still talk about that? Like, we're our biggest resource, and the people closest to us, you know, yeah, it's uncomfortable. Like when I'll share another kind of experience. Like I'm sitting here with like 5 women, right? So I have a wife and 2 daughters, and you know, when Me Too and kind of this like we were shining the light on just like gender issues, right? Like I had to listen to some uncomfortable stuff from my wife and from my women friends, and it was like I had to like, yo, I did that. But it's taken our relationships and our existence to a place now where, you know, we're more open and there's better understanding and we can do more together, you know. So yeah, we can read all the books and have all the webinars, but it's the simple things. It's like, you know, like I have 2 little girls, and they're, you know, Disney, and my little girls, you know, they're black girls, and you know, but I don't really like Disney because they think all the princesses are white. I'm good, right? So it's like my friends who are white, you know, we have uncomfortable. I may text them like, "Yo, black dude asking a white dude question. Like, I don't know how this works over there. Like, is it? Am I?" Or like they would text me like, "Hey, like this gonna be weird, but is this? What am I? Am I off base here?" And it's just being open like that, I think, is where we get. Because the uncomfortable stuff is just fear, and it's not really real. It's us just trying to stay comfortable. It's fear. It's fear.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's fear. It's 100%. It's fear. Totally. I think that is really evident to me. And I mean, you know, my children have taught me so much in, you know, such a little time. I mean, their experience of the world is very different than my experience growing up, because I grew up in the very, very, you know, lily white suburbs of Philadelphia. We live in Columbia, and you know, I love that it's that my children have a better understanding of what diversity looks like than I did. It's still not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction, and we'll continue as a family and as, you know, parents to encourage that and to keep their minds, you know, open, and to be, you know, showing us and teaching us things too that we didn't expect to learn. Well, I think that kind of brings us to a close, everyone. I'm immensely grateful to you all for taking this time. It means everything to me. It means a lot to have you be vulnerable. I know it's been, you know, a lot to ask for you to talk and speak and, you know, be open about these things. I really appreciate it. And I'm wonderfully thankful to you all. So I'm Jennifer Dominic of Love Life Images. The Baltimore Events Collective is kind of a newer group that I've just been starting to build and grow, and anyone who would like to continue to join us. My intention is to have a follow-up next week of some sort. I'd love some input, feedback. Anyone who has anything to share with me, I'm open to hearing it. If anyone's interested in sharing their experiences, let's talk. And then I'm thinking that after we have a few conversations and work through some of these things, I'd also like to talk to individual business owners to get their experiences and interview individual business owners too. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you are interested in any of those things. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you so much,
having us.
Jennifer.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.